Yeah, I worked my way up from, washing cars on my dad's lot to ultimately running his business. And at one point I was a used car manager, and I was responsible for managing the entire used car inventory. And you've probably heard of Kelley Blue Book. And they decided somewhere along the way that they were going to come up with a new valuation every Friday. Oh, wow. And so we would go out and we'd buy cars at the auction, and before I could get them back to the lot and cleaned up to put out for sale, the values were already dropping. When I first got into real estate, I asked my mentor, I said, if you had 100 apartment units, how many of those people would pay you rent every month? And he says, you'd probably have about 95 of those units rented, and almost all of them will pay their rent. Otherwise, they get evicted.
Right.
And I thought to myself, in my mind, that was like having 100 cars on the lot, and every month I sold 95 of them.
Selling all of them, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm in. This is it. I'm never going back to the car business.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 49 of the Realized Gains podcast. I'm Stephen Tran. I'm a multifamily and short-term rental investor, and I'm also an agent in Oregon and Washington.
And I'm your co-host, Jordan Lee, mortgage loan officer, licensed in about 10 states. And I'm based here in Portland, and I invest in single-family homes.
And Jordan, I know we had a super exciting episode. Who did we interview for episode 49?
Yeah, we had Gabe Johansen on the show earlier, and it was super interesting episode. So he went through a lot of stuff. He went from the car world to getting into real estate, and I think he talks a lot about creative financing. And
I mean, somehow he went with seller financing and got up to 1,000 units, which I think is crazy, and just lots of little nuggets about his thoughts on the economy, why real estate's one of the best vehicles ever for growing wealth.
Talks a lot about partnering and investing in multifamily. So if you're interested in creative financing, partnering, and just acquiring a lot of units, I think this is a good episode for you.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 49 of the Realized Gains podcast. I'm Stephen Tran.
And I'm your co-host, Jordan Lee, and we're super excited to have Gabe Johansen on the show. He's with SMI Realty based in Salem. Gabe, do you want to just give us a quick intro into your background and sort of your journey into real estate and how you got interested in investing?
Sure, you bet. Well, my background's actually in the car business.
Oh, I remember you talking about that. That's right.
Yeah, my dad was a car dealer. We moved to Oregon in 1989. He bought the Nissan dealership in Salem, and I spent 20 years of my life learning the hard way, sales and marketing and deal psychology and all of those fun things. And towards the end of that, he decided he wanted to sell, and I wanted to do something different. And so I had a friend who at the time owned SMI, and he invited me in to teach me real estate. And so he brought me in, and we connected our desks together. And his rule for me, his only rule, was he wasn't going to teach me real estate unless I became an investor. So
oh, really?
I was not smart enough on my own to come up with the idea like you gentlemen are. I just wanted out of the car business, and somebody pulled me into real estate. I thought it sounded like it might be fun, and I actually told him I would rather skip the brokerage part and just invest. That sounded really interesting to me, and so we spent a few years together, and I was brokering deals, and then we started buying some deals together. Okay. And I got hooked. I mean, it took me a few years of being in real estate before I think recognized really the power of becoming an investor and how it can change your life for the better. And once I could see the light, I was all in, and now I just live, breathe real estate all the time.
I mean, what was that flip over moment for you? I mean, you probably had a couple properties at this point, or?
Well, yeah. So my first deal, it took. I know we're talking to an audience that wants to get into real estate, and we talked before the show a little bit about how hard that is to make that leap. The first deal is really the hardest one to do, and it took me 3 years to find the perfect first deal to do.
But did you own a primary before? Like you owned your home while you were working in the car world?
Sure, yeah. I actually bought my first house when I was 19 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
and who encouraged you to do that?
I think I just did it naturally.
Okay.
I think that it was just, I just knew that I was supposed to buy a house.
So you weren't in college or anything. You were just like,
I was in college.
You bought a home while you were in college.
Oh boy, you guys, we don't have time for this on this podcast. Yeah, I got married in between my junior and senior year of high school.
Oh, wow.
And while I was in college, we had our second child. So I was 19 with 2 kids and married.
Okay.
And so I was at a different stage of life.
In that stage of life, it was
time to buy a house. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that might make more sense.
Yeah, totally.
I wasn't just partying with my friends and went out and decided it was time to get my first house.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had owned real estate before in the past. And as a matter of fact, it's funny that we bring that up because I still remember my first house. I think I paid $124,000 for it, brand new, 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath in Kaiser.
Bought it from the builder.
Bought it from the builder. Actually used I had a grant to go to school, and so I used my tuition money as a down payment to buy it. Bought it on my own credit. It was nice. Smarter to buy the house than it was to go to school, I think. But yeah, ended up when you get married that young, oftentimes relationships don't work. We ended up sadly divorced. And at a time where divorce could have really taken me down, the equity in that house is what held everything together.
That saved you, huh?
And that house went up in value quite a bit, and we were able to sell that and have the equity from that to do. And I bought another one, and on and on. And so yeah, I've been a homeowner pretty much.
So you had kind of seen some of the value in real estate while you were working in the auto world because you had bought and sold a couple of homes.
Yeah,
and seen the equity go up.
Well,
over time.
Interestingly, in the car business, you sit and look at people's credit reports all day long and what their income levels are, and so you get to see that over and over and over. And of course, every car lot I'm sure is different. If you're selling Lamborghinis, you have rich people coming in every day. I was selling Nissans, so I just had blue collar people, state workers, and people coming in all the time and checking their credit. And it was interesting to see, how much more money people in real estate made than the people just doing normal jobs. And so I was intrigued while I was in the car business. I was certainly intrigued by real estate. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I guess it's like you're still selling a higher end priced product that you don't buy as regularly, but there's a difference in how fast you want to sell a car versus homes over time. They gain value, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So, I worked my way up from, washing cars on my dad's lot to ultimately running his business. And at one point, I was a used car manager, and I was responsible for managing the entire used car inventory. And you've probably heard of Kelley Blue Book. Yep. Kelley Blue Book, back in the day, we'd get a book every month in the mail, and we'd go through it kind of like a baseball card guide to decide what a car was worth.
Right.
And then internet and everything that came up with software. And they decided somewhere along the way that they were going to come up with a new valuation every Friday. Oh, wow. And so we would go out and we'd buy cars at the auction, and before I could get them back to the lot and cleaned up to put out for sale, the values were already dropping.
Oh, man.
So you'd buy a car and you thought you made a really good buy, and by the time it hits the lot on the weekend, you go, oh man, the value already dropped. So when I first got into real estate, I asked my mentor, I said, if you had 100 apartment units, how many of those people would pay you rent every month? And he says, you'd probably have about 95 of those units rented, and almost all of them will pay their rent. Otherwise, they get evicted.
Right.
And I thought to myself, in my mind, that was like having 100 cars on the lot, and every month I sold 95 of them.
Selling all of them, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm in. This is it. I'm never going back to the car business. So I relate everything from cars over into real estate. But the values, they say a car is a depreciating asset, but it doesn't generate cash flow. So it's not really an asset. It's just it's something you need, and they go down in value. And so to manage an inventory when you're trying to sell, you're right. Like a car, you put it on your lot and you've got to get rid of it in a month or two, or else you got to start dropping the price. It's really it's a really time-sensitive game that you play. And in real estate, it's fun because you go buy a building and you just wait a little while, and then you go, wow, it's worth more. If they had Kelley Blue Book for buildings, I would be happy for that report to come out every week. I'd love to read that on my portfolio.
I think there's tech that sends out valuations. They're not perfect appraisal values, but they're pretty close.
Like an algorithm, like a Zillow type thing.
Yeah. I'm happy to see those numbers I used to be happy to see those numbers until this year.
Yeah. Well, you only lose the money if you sell, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, most of my properties are out. I'm okay.
So it took 3 years, and what in that meantime you were learning how to like broker deals, just doing normal realtor type stuff. What was the hesitation? Because I know you'd had the opportunity, the experience to kind of buy and sell real estate already, and seen the value. What was that hesitation over that 3 years?
So I should give a little bit of backstory to my brokerage. I got in to be an apartment broker, and so I sold
so you were more
from day one.
okay.
I sold multifamily.
Yeah.
I've never sold a house before, so I've sold a neighborhood with 43 houses in it before, but I've never sold a house.
Right.
So I got into being a multifamily broker and to be an investor, and so just learning how to underwrite a deal, learning what a deal was. And my mentor was very, very conservative and still is to this day. And, he would always tell me that you can't stub your toe on your first deal. And so this is what makes it so hard to get in. And ultimately what ended up happening was we found, we took a run at a few buildings, but we found a duplex in Albany that was a former meth lab. It had been certified to be habitable, but people had moved in and just completely trashed the place. The roof was caving in. There was literally like a hole in the ceiling. Like it was raining on the inside of the building. This place was bad. Like it needed a lot of work. We bought it for $100,000. And I actually borrowed the money from a friend, and instead of doing like a hard money deal, I borrowed $125,000 from a friend at 10% interest, no points.
Nice friend.
And he was happy to do it, and we put him in first position. And we spent about a year. We cleaned that place up in 3 or 4 months, got it rented up, it cash flowed, and then we refinanced it. And then I think we had it about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, and we sold that and rolled it into an 11-unit complex. And so by that time, once I got the first deal under my belt, it wasn't so scary anymore. And to be able to do a deal that was pretty much like there's no way you can lose no matter what, and if you did, it's $100,000 type of a deal. Right. I think that was a good way to do it because it showed me, even in doing that deal, I'll be honest, in the first 3 or 4 months, I can remember we actually ended up having to put about $40,000 in. So we had over borrowed by $25,000 to do the rehab, but now we needed another $15,000, and I was 50-50 owner. And so I had to write a check for $7,500. And the day that I wrote that $7,500 check, I remember thinking like, this sucks. Why do I want to be a real estate investor? I didn't get it. It was at that time, it just felt like, I bought this thing and looked for it for 3 years, and I finally bought it. Now I'm over there working on it, and we've got to buy a new roof for it, and I'm painting it and doing all this sweat equity and everything. And, it wasn't quite cash flowing or anything. And then, I wouldn't even have tenants at that point. And I'm putting money into this thing and writing that check. That was a big check for me at the time. And I just thought, man, I'm not sure if this is for me. This isn't very fun. And, we got it rented up, and things started cash flowing. And once I got a check coming back to me, even though it was probably only a few $100s, I was like, oh, yeah, I love this. Now I know I'm a real estate investor.
I mean, when you were describing the property, I was like, there's no way this went smoothly on your first deal, with the roof and everything else.
Yeah, it wasn't. The rehab took a few months, at least a couple months, I think, longer than what we had expected it to, and it cost a little more and everything. But in the end, it worked. And, from there, bought a triplex and a fourplex and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, no, I've definitely been there, put in the sweat equity. Like, did you contract out any of this?
We did a little bit. We had the contractor do the roof. We did a lot of the interior stuff ourselves. We painted it, did the flooring ourselves. We painted exterior, interior, and yeah, most of it, I would say, the majority of it we did ourselves, yeah.
Would you say you're a handy person?
No. As a matter of fact, my partner is, and he really enjoys that sort of thing, and I don't. And so I would show up in my BMW, with my $200 hiking boots on, and I can remember going home thinking, like, I have paint all over me. I'm sitting in this car. I was like, I'm not built to be a hands-on guy. I mean, parts of it were sort of fun, but I knew early on that it was not going to be the kind of owner that I wanted to be. I want to buy buildings and throw the keys to a property manager and have the people who know what they're doing take care of the physical asset.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that obviously getting that experience lets you know when you go get a quote, like you're like, it's not that hard. It shouldn't cost that much.
Yeah, gives you a new appreciation for what they do.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, appreciation and like also obviously when people are trying to gouge you.
Yeah. You got your eyes open, and contractors often will when they can sense when you have no clue what's going on. They'll definitely try to come after you.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, you jump straight into obviously apartment buildings. Seems like commercial. That's a whole different world. Do you want to kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the backstory there. I ended up owning the brokerage. So I bought the brokerage, and then later I bought a management company. So today, just to give a little bit of color to my background, is I'm a broker and a property manager, SMI, real estate and property management. So we manage about 4,000 residential units.
Wow.
We're currently in the process of acquiring another company here in Portland that's about the same size as us, or just a little bit smaller. So we're one of the larger management companies in the area. That's sort of the backbone and foundation to everything we do. Our brokerage is made up of 50 brokers. We do residential and commercial. I just happen to personally broker in apartments, and I primarily, probably 95% of my portfolio is multifamily. So I consider myself to be a multifamily guy.
And your management side does mostly multifamily too, or do you do single family?
We
as well?
do a little bit of single family, but mostly
Mostly
multifamily. And we do some commercial buildings as well, but we're known for, community type properties.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
So I'm definitely an apartment guy. I like Plex. We still to this day will buy a rental house if the right deal comes up. There's no deal really too small. And so, yeah, I think what got me interested in doing bigger deals just as we went is, the Plex market is very, in pricing anyway, it's very volatile. I guess the demographic that buys a 1 to 4 unit qualifies for residential financing, which you guys are, super familiar with. And so when the market shifts and there's plenty of homes for people to buy, home buyers are not really in the market to buy a 1 to 4 unit. And so they'll buy one unit, but they're not out buying investment properties. And so then you've got just investors, and investors underwrite for cash flow and the type of returns that they're looking for. And so they'll look at a deal much differently than a home buyer will. And Jordan hands somebody a pre-approval letter and says you can spend $700,000 if you buy a triplex and it's got X amount of additional income coming in, and that they take that letter, a home buyer will, and they'll just go buy the first triplex they can find for $700,000.
Right.
They're not necessarily underwriting it. Is that the right triplex? And so what we found is that the Plex market will go from kind of an extreme, like the housing market and the multifamily market stays fairly steady, but the Plex market will go up and down. And so this creates an opportunity, especially for our listeners, to take a look at that. Right now, I think that maybe because there's not a lot of homes on the market, that maybe Plexes are still selling at the top end because it's what people can qualify to get into. But as soon as those folks leave that market and it shifts back over to the investor buyer, those will drop again. So if you can catch some of those Plexes on the lower end, these are ones that when the market shifts, we call it trading stock. And you can go buy. I mean, that's why I think it's still fun to go buy any 1 to 4 unit that you think is a really great deal, because you can catch those on an upswing and you can roll that equity now into a larger apartment complex. So, yeah.
And what do you do for your underwriting? Do you have like a very complex and specific way of doing it, or is it more you underwrite for like XYZ reason, or?
So I don't own a single piece of real estate without partners. My portfolio is about 1,000 units. I own about 35% of that. I buy mainly in about 4 or 5 different partnerships. You guys interviewed my partner, Trevor Howard, I think a few episodes ago, or maybe just 1 or 2 episodes ago. And so I bring my skill set to the table, and then most of the time I bring in partners that have a skill set. And I typically am not the partner that goes out and arranges financing, and I'm also not a spreadsheet guy. I know how to work a spreadsheet,
Right.
but I'm the back of the napkin guy. So somebody will find
Great,
a
that's
deal.
what we love to hear.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah.
It's easy to describe in words. Yeah.
I have another mentor I should talk about who owns about 2,000 doors, and he and I are partners now today, and he's my number one client. And it's kind of funny. When we buy deals, we don't underwrite them at all, but we buy in a very particular way. We like leverage, and so we're always looking for creative structures to get our name on assets without using down payment or using very little down payment.
Okay.
And so when we can get our name onto a deal, we'll study the numbers very much back of the napkin and just get an idea of how we think it might pencil. We're trying to find a deal that won't bleed too much. But we sort of have a saying, and this is something that he taught me. He's like, you hear about paralysis by analysis and these things.
Yeah.
I think you can get hung up in spreadsheets a little bit too much. And he'll laugh and say, "Well, why would we underwrite it? We'll just end up talking ourselves out of the deal."
Yeah,
and
totally.
so the reality is almost all deals will work. I mean, I think every deal ultimately will work. It's just a matter of time, and so you have to be able. To hang on for that ride. It's almost like a bad haircut, right? It's like, in a week, it's not a bad haircut anymore, right? And so you can pay too much for a deal. You can buy the wrong deal. And generally, as long as you can hang on, eventually it's a deal. Now, on your first deal, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. And we've talked about that as well, that you kind of have to have a base before you can really become a cowboy and go out there and just start buying everything and not paying attention. You really should pay attention. I think it's wise to underwrite. And the other thing is, when you first get started, you want to know the numbers. You want to know what makes a deal. And so underwriting is super important to the extent that you need to figure out what a deal is for you. Everybody has a different appetite for risk. Everybody's looking for something different. Some people want leverage. Some people are looking at appreciation. Some are looking at cash flow. And you have to figure out what kind of investor you are. I always say that humans are all very unique and investors are all humans, right? And so deals are all unique. Buildings are all unique. Deal structures are all unique. Financing is all unique. So this puzzle that we piece together is not a one size fits all. It's very different for everybody. And so you have to decide what a deal is for you. And underwriting deals, I'm not dissuading everybody to spend time studying the numbers, because I think it's a very important exercise to do. I think at some point you have to just do a deal. And Napoleon Hill, if you've read Think and Grow Rich, one of his concepts, or one of the things he says that I like so much, is that action is the highest form of intelligence. So you don't want to get hung up. Being really good at spreadsheets is not going to make you rich. It might tell you who you are, and it might tell you how you want to invest. But once you've done some deals, for me, real estate has become more of an art than a science.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't get hung up as much on some of the nuances of what might make somebody steer clear of a deal. I know what a deal is for me, and I don't have to go study the numbers over and over and over again. Like Trevor brings a deal, and I look at it, and I can tell him in 30 seconds what I think makes it a deal and how much it should be worth. And he'll say, "Well, let me dig in," and he'll go spend a half hour on a spreadsheet, and he'll come back and he's like, "You're within $50," So you don't get that. I don't think you get that instinctually. I think you do get that by learning how to underwrite. And then over time, we sort of downplay the importance of underwriting, but that might be because we have more of a sense of what a deal is for us.
Building.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm just thinking, you're underwriting for today. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, the economy, how things change.
That's one of the things I like least about underwriting is you see these projections of 3 year, 4 years, and 5 years out. And then you'll see, okay, well, we've modeled this to have 3% rent growth, and we've modeled it to have all these things. And you look at all the variables that are baked into that, and you're thinking like, well, this thing says in 5 years I'm going to be rich. Well, you can get in a lot of trouble trying to have a crystal ball and thinking that your spreadsheet's telling you, like, it'll give you an idea of where things might go, and you can stress test test it and go, well, if things went really well, it could be really good. If things went really bad, it could be here. We can decide in that spectrum.
The Monte Carlo effect of like, 1,000 different variables.
There are so many variables. You really can't tell. And for me, I've done deals I should have never done. I've gotten myself into major problems that I've had to get myself out of. And I sort of decided, like, if you were to ask me what's my style and what are the kind of buildings that I like to buy, I like to do all the deals. I like to do all the deals that I possibly can. And part of that is I'm just very curious to know, what each, you especially when you're brokering, you see so many different styles of investing. Speaking of Napoleon Hill, he studied hundreds or thousands of people who were rich and tried to find some common thread. I thought I was going to be really smart. And when I became a broker, I was going to study these rich investors, and I was going to figure out, like, there's got to be one thing that they all do, right? And when you look at rich people who own real estate, they're all different, and they all think they're right and the other person's wrong. It's like you get people that pay all cash, you get people that are 100% leverage, you get people that want value add, you got people that only want brand new product, you got people that want smallplex, and you have people that only want 100 plus unit complexes. Like, you just have this wide array of different styles. And so it was really hard for me to find a common thread. I think the only common thread might be real estate itself. They're all very successful, and they all own real estate, and they do it their own way. Another thing I noticed about wealthy people is they don't like to sit on cash. And we'd probably have to have an entire different podcast to discuss my feelings about the U.S. dollar and the way we print money and why I think we should hold hard assets and not necessarily just stockpile cash. But I can tell you that wealthy people, there's an urgency when they sit on too much cash to put it into assets. That when I first saw it, I was bewildered, because I was like, man, if I was sitting on that much cash, I'd be at the beach right now, not worried about what am I going to do to get this into an asset, know? But the reality is they understand that their cash is on fire and that it's losing its purchasing power every second of every day. And they need to get that into an asset. And, you can put that into a lot of different things. You can do stock market or bonds or Bitcoin or whatever you're into. For real estate investors, I think we've all done the exercise, and at least for us anyway, and for me, I feel like real estate is the greatest wealth creation tool in the history of man. And I think that I would much rather own buildings than stockpile cash. And when you look at commercial real estate, or any cash producing real estate as a currency, I think that it really shifts your mind as to what kind of an investor you become. We buy real estate, I say, with urgency. Because it's not just for fun. It's a necessity. We have to own real estate. We have to own buildings, because if I don't have buildings, I don't really have wealth. I have this, I'd love to have a ton of cash, but the reality is the way that they can manipulate that and generate so much. I mean, I think almost 40% of all U.S. dollars printed in all time have been printed since COVID.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I heard of that.
And so, people go, oh, well, your fourplex, Stephen, went up. You bought it for $1 million. It's worth $1.5 million. You made, it went up in value $500,000. The reality is it might have gone up a little, but really your dollar went down in value. That's what happened. The dollar versus real estate, that ratio changed. And so you can buy less real estate with your dollar now. That's why your building goes up in value, because the purchasing power of your dollar goes down. And so when you look at it from that angle, it becomes less about, oh, this is my hobby, and oh, I've got a little extra money I want to throw over here, and wouldn't it be fun to have some passive income? And I really look at this like it's a necessity. Everybody needs to own real estate. You may not want to own 1,000 doors, but you need to own real estate. Like it's super important, I think, for everybody, even if you're a stock market kind of person.
You consider it a part of diversifying your portfolio, basically. Your
retirement portfolio. I don't diversify at all. I do one thing. I buy real estate. I don't believe in diversity.
Well, yeah. I mean, you consider it part of your retirement portfolio in the sense that you would advise someone to own real estate. Your point being is that it helps with your long-term outlook?
I think that we're moving into a world where we're not going to have the lower, middle, upper class. I don't think we really have it today. I think that we're moving into a class system that really is divided by, do you own real estate or do you not own real estate? I think there's going to be people that own or assets. I think there'll be people that own assets and people that don't own assets. And if you don't own assets, you're not building generational wealth. You're not building any sort of financial freedom or security for you and your family. It's super, super important to have these. And it's, there is risk. There's always going to be risk. But to me, it's much more risky to not own real estate than it is to own real estate. Even if you did your first deal and it's the wrong deal, you're going to learn from that. And I would advise to go out and just keep doing it until you put your name on some buildings and, start small and, learn about yourself and figure out what it is. If you enjoy it, great. But even if you don't, find a way in, or if you just have some money and you don't want to think that hard, find somebody that'll go invest it for you or partner with you or something. Yeah.
I did want to ask about, obviously getting into a building, you have your back of the napkin kind of calculations. I mean, I have mine too, but it's in the residential world. Okay. Obviously, like a primary loan or investor loan. This is my mortgage. This is my cash flow. Easy peasy, making money. This is my cash and cash return. Bam. But, in your world, you're doing a lot of creative financing, seller finance, etc. How do you do, can you kind of give us the process of what that back of the napkin looks like?
Yeah, are you happy if you're just breaking even?
Sure.
Or if you're bleeding a little bit, as long as you're not coming in with a lot of cash?
So there's only 4 economic benefits to owning real estate, and that's cash flow, principal buy down, which is basically cash flow. It's just paying off your loans. Yep. And then appreciation, which we hope our buildings go up in value. And depreciation, which is amazing. I love depreciation because that's like phantom income. That's where, the government says we get to write off a loss when we didn't really have one. Right. And so when I look at a deal, going back to that art more than science, I teach my brokers and my clients to look at a deal from every angle and not to get hung up on price. Price is just one ingredient to bake that cake. There are so many other things that you can do to make a deal. And so when everybody's running after the cheapest deal and something comes out on the market, it's $50,000 lower than it should be, and you got 20 offers coming in and everybody's going crazy. I'm not looking for that deal. I mean, if we can find that deal and we can do the deal, great. I'm totally fine with that. But what I'm more looking for is how do we get our name onto these assets in using as little money out of my pocket as possible. I can't go out. When I started my portfolio 8 years ago, I had just started my brokerage career. I wasn't independently wealthy. I had no money. I was on unemployment when I became a real estate broker. I had nothing, okay? And so I had to buy my portfolio with my mouth. I couldn't buy it with my wallet. And so this sounds kind of mean, but I tell my brokers to use their whole brain. Let's really think about what all of the different ways are that we can get into a deal. So I'm not super price sensitive, and I'm not super rate sensitive either. Mm-hmm. I'm not very hung up on those things. Right. What I'm looking for is a your price, my terms kind of a deal. I'm willing to pay you top dollar for your property if you're willing to help me find a way to get into this. Now, if you're running around, you're saying I want to do my first deal. This is the thing I hear from people all the time. Well, you got to have money to make money. I think that's a myth. Sure, if you have some money, that might make this a little bit easier. But the reality is you have to have an education. You have to have knowledge. You have to have there's You have to go learn how to put deals together, and you have to learn what a deal is. If you can do that, you don't need any money. Because first off, there's so much money in the world. There is so much money. If you come from a scarcity mindset and you think that there's no money, there's the first place to start, is go really look and see how much money is floating around this planet. There is nearly an unlimited supply of money, okay? And that money is all looking for the same thing. It all wants yield. So you don't have to go it's very hard to go make the money. You know, you can go work your job or get the best job on the planet, and you're going to pay taxes, and you're going to be working all the time, and you're going to have a certain amount of income that comes from that. And then what's left over, even if you go out and make $1 million a year, what do you have left over to invest? What are you going to buy? You maybe save up a down payment for a duplex or something like that. So I think that you have to look at creative structures, and you have to look for other ways to do a deal other than just traditional financing. And so one of the ways that we do that is when we are looking at a deal, we're always trying to keep the seller in the deal in some way. There's nobody in your deal that's more motivated to help you than the person selling it to you. And so oftentimes you'll go to somebody and you'll say, hey, you want to buy this $500,000 building, and what would be ideal for you? Well, the building might only be worth $450,000, but I would pay you $500,000 if you carried the note for me with 100% financing, and I'll pay the brokers and I'll pay closing costs, and we'll just do a note, and I'll put you in first position. Well, oftentimes they have a loan on it already. Well, what are we going to do? Are we going to wrap that debt? So now you start talking about getting creative. But we've gone to the extent of developing a few different models strategies to where we'll come in and keep the seller in the deal. We say, well, would you carry a large, maybe 5% down or 10% down? And that's very common. You hear people asking for those deals all day long. Mm-hmm. But what if we flip that script and we say, well, what if we could get you 70% of the money now? Would you carry 30% for us? Mm-hmm. There's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing that. You might be able to put them in a second position, depending on your lender in first, if they'll allow it. Mm-hmm. Usually, I think on 1 to 4 units, that's probably easier, actually, mm-hmm. than when you get into commercial money. On a commercial loan, usually you can't put junior debt on there. And so how your price, okay, I'll give you the $500,000, but I don't want to use a down payment. So I'm just going to ask the seller, will you loan me the down payment money?
Right.
That's simple. Now the question becomes, how do we give them security? What are the terms of that? What I'm getting at is, if I'm going to go buy that building, instead of having to try to figure out a way to save $150,000 to go buy that, how do I find that money elsewhere? It might just be to the extent that I really like this deal, and I go to Steven, and Steven has $150,000. I go, hey, I found a deal. I need some money to do the deal. Let's be partners and do the deal. I mean, there's an infinite amount of ways to solve the problem. It's only bound by your imagination, and I think that we're always looking to leverage. Let me talk just briefly about leverage, and one of the reasons why we like leverage so much. So let's use easy math. If we go out and we buy $1 million building, mm-hmm. we pay cash.
Yep.
We want to double our money.
Yep.
We got to figure out a way to make this thing worth $2 million.
Right.
Now, we could roll the dice and just hope, or we could be really good operators and we can go in and we can double the rent roll and keep our expenses the same.
Yep.
And now we got a building that's worth twice as much. We just doubled our money. If I go out and do a normal bank loan and I put today is probably more like 40% down.
Yep.
But let's just say I put $300,000 down, and it's my own money, $300,000. I borrow $700,000 from the bank. Well, now I only have to make that building worth 1.3, and I've just doubled my money.
Yep.
Now let's go to a seller carry with 10% down. I put $100,000 down. Now I only have to make it worth 1.1. Well, what happens if I get 100% financing and I use somebody else's money to buy the $1 million building? The day that it goes up $1 in value, I've just made an infinite return.
Yep.
It'll break your spreadsheet.
Right.
You won't even know what to do. It'll just give you some, wingdings or whatever you call it, right? So the leverage, when you really look at, utilizing other people's money to get your name on assets, mm-hmm. for us, the question Stephen asked earlier is, what do we look at? We look at how do we get our name on as much real estate as we possibly can with as little money out of our pocket as we possibly can. And if it's not necessarily a no money game, we call it a no money down game, but you're still going to have bleed. You're still going to have, it needs a roof. Guess what? You get to write a check for the roof.
Right.
2 people just moved out and we have turnover. Well, guess what? You're going to pay for that turnover, and you have cash flow, but it's negative cash flow. So now you have these buildings, and this is what most people, I would say, especially early investors, don't really have the guts for or the heart for is to own buildings they got to write checks for. Just like my story, when I had to write a $7,500 check, I thought maybe this isn't for me.
Right.
And so that's how most people feel.
Right.
Once you do a round trip on an investment and you see, oh, that $7,500 ended up coming back to me in multiples, and it bought me an 11-plex and so on, then you can kind of, you can sort of see the whole picture rather than just, oh my gosh, I have these buildings that I have to write checks to all the time. So, everybody's going to have to decide for themselves. A high leverage deal, you're at very much risk of writing checks. But if I didn't have to write the $300,000 check to buy it, anything less than that I have to put into it, under $300,000, I'm still less money out of my pocket, right? And there's a tax play here. If I take and park $300,000 into that building, I've got to go out and make $500,000 first. And then I have to pay taxes. And now I have this post-tax money that I'm going to go park in this asset that's very illiquid, that's going to be hard for me to get my $300,000 back unless I go sell it or refinance it. I'm just parking money, right? If I can buy that money with somebody else, if I can buy that building with somebody else's money, and then I have to put a $100,000 roof on it, I'm going to write off that $100,000 to expense. I'm saving money on taxes by putting the money into the building afterwards instead of parking post-tax dollars. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I love the idea of the tax savings. Now, you have to have income. And so, for me, there are different models. There are investors who want cash flow, and there's investors who want appreciation. And I think probably a lot of your listeners are probably on the West Coast. And so we live in an appreciation market. If you're out hunting for cash flow, you might have to go inland. The middle states is where the cash flow is. Look at mobile home parks, look at some of the Midwestern type states where you can still buy a house for $30,000 or whatever, right? Like there are places that you can make cash flow. This market is a very hard cash flow market. I mean, eventually a building will cash flow, but it takes a little while to get there. If you're banking on living on the cash flow of your buildings, you might be disappointed being an Oregon or Washington investor. It might take you a while to get to the point where you have that sort of an income coming in. So for me, I'm looking. I play the appreciation game, obviously, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why is when I first got started, I was like everybody else, and I thought, wow, if I could buy these buildings and I could just have $5,000 a month in cash flow, like think of the pressure that's going to take off of me to go make this income. Now I could feel like I can I could have that freedom I'm looking for. I can go out and I can broker deals when I want to. I can go on vacation when I want to, do whatever I want. In my opinion, for me, that was very small thinking. I didn't realize it was small thinking at the time until I got to the point where I was making $5,000 in passive income, and then somebody showed me how to build a balance sheet, and they showed me how to build a financial statement. I looked at my personal financial statement, and I said, well, I'm a millionaire. I'm a multimillionaire. I was looking over here like, oh, I need $5,000, and over here now there's millions of dollars. Oh my God! Equity, I thought, what a dummy I am. Like I was over here playing the small game when there's all this money to be made, and that's probably where my brain switched, and I said, okay, I'm gonna find a way to make my cash flow. It's nice to own some buildings, obviously, that cash flow, and you start to build a base, and you get to a certain point. It's like, okay, well, how much cash do you really need every single month? But for me, owning businesses, especially when they're doing well, it's like I call it now money and tomorrow money. Mm-hmm. And so the businesses provide me enough now money to where I'm not really relying on passive income. Most of the money that comes in from my buildings, I can just put right back into the buildings or use it to go buy more buildings. That's the cool thing about it. Warren Buffett talks about compounding interest. Most people have some understanding of this because they've gotten into credit card debt. And you just see that like this snowball sort of just gets out of control in the wrong direction. You can snowball that in the right direction by owning assets, because these assets eventually will start buying you more assets. And now you're not out trying to figure out, how do I make enough money to go put a down payment? Well, now you got all this equity. You just bought a 4-plex, and a couple years later, you're trading that into an 8-plex because of the equity in the building. You didn't have to go out and, bust your hump every day to make a big down payment to go buy the next one. So now money and tomorrow money is the way I look at it. That's kind of a kindergarten level. But I feel like to be, to really be wealthy and to build what I'm trying to build, I have to be a big thinker. And to be hung up on cash flow, to me, on some level, is small thinking. And so you do want to have cash flow. One of my favorite portfolios I've ever looked at, there's this investor. He owns a ton of stuff. And it's like 75% of his buildings, I think, are on the coastlines, and they're all multifamily. And then 25% of his portfolio is mobile home park in the middle of the country. And the mobile home parks provide a platform for him. That's what gives him. That's like me having businesses. He has this cash flow that comes in that he knows is just every month that check is going to show up, right? And then he can go out, and on that foundation, he can put his name on assets in markets where they're appreciating a lot of value. You don't need all of that cash flow once you grow to a certain point. I think, when you're first starting out, the only thing you can really think of is, I need more money.
Right.
But then it doesn't take very long until you're like, well, how much money do you really need? I mean, you can go try to spend as much as you can possibly dream of, and you'll realize you probably don't need as much cash as you thought you did. Once you have a nice lifestyle going, you got a good foundation. It took me about 3 years to probably build up a good amount of cash flow and equity to where I felt like I was going out and I was able to do deals where I wasn't hung up on, oh my gosh, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to survive and build what I'm trying to build.
Yeah, I mean, and that example you gave of the guy who has the stuff on the West Coast that appreciates, and the stuff in the Midwest, the mobile home parks. I mean, that's kind of, in a sense, a sort of diversification, but in real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's diversifying between a cash flow model and an appreciation model. I think that one of the hangups for a lot of folks and a lot of my clients who are getting into investing is the fact that in every book you read and everything you listen to, everyone will tell you that if you don't buy for cash flow, you're an idiot, right? I mean, that's kind of the premise is every deal should be underwritten to cash flow. And if you don't understand, well, today it doesn't cash flow, but the rents, before the show, Stephen was talking about rents. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about your fourplex. You said your rents were like $1,000 or something,
yeah, exactly.
and now what are they today?
$2,000.
Okay, $2,000. So for every $100 in net income you get per month, so let's say you raise the rent on one tenant $100.
Yeah.
And your expenses are flat; they don't change. On a 6 cap, you just made $20,000 in appreciation. Yeah. Once you start to understand the way capitalization rates work in commercial real estate, on a 5 cap, it's $25,000. So a year ago, things were selling at a 5 cap. Now they're a little bit higher still. So multiply that. You did that on one unit from 1,000 to 2,000. Your expenses, 4 units. Okay. So let's just talk about 1 unit for a second. Yeah. Your expenses probably went up a little bit, but you take that 20,000 and you multiply it times 10, you just made 200,000. Yeah. Now you multiply that times 4, you made 800,000. Now that's not the reality because your expenses have gone up, insurance has gone up, utilities have gone up. So you still probably made 400,000, 500,000 in appreciation in how long? 2 years? 3 years?
3 years.
So you think about that for a second. Like, how hard do you have to work to make $500,000 of tax-sheltered income? I mean,
I worked a little hard.
No, he means if you're working like your engineering job.
That's
compared to that.
Yeah. Oh man, like full time, 40 hours a week, multiple years. Yes.
That's a long. Yeah, it's just a lot of work, and so this is why you want to hold the asset. Now, maybe the values have dropped a little bit, cap rates have gone up, or whatever the case may be. But when you look at how this is why a lot of people say, well, buy for cash flow, don't buy for appreciation, because if you're buying for appreciation, you're gambling. You're just rolling the dice. But the truth is if you become a really good operator, you can buy that building at $1,000 rent and know, even if they weren't $2,000 back then, at least you know that you can raise the rent to a certain level. You knew the day you bought it that rents should have been more than $1,000.
Oh,
probably.
yeah, that's 100% the
What
reason I bought it.
what were the rents? What were the rents back then?
1,100, and then I fixed it up, and then there were 2,000.
So, but what was market rent at the time that you bought it? Because you knew 1,100 was not enough.
I was thinking it would probably go for about 1,800.
Okay, so it's gone up a couple hundred more than that. But you knew going in that they shouldn't be 1,100; they should be 1,800. So you're not gambling.
No.
You knew that if you reposition the asset and you change the tenant base, or you clean the units up or do whatever you have to do.
And that wasn't a spreadsheet calculation. That was I can afford this, and I think this is gonna go up, right?
I shot from the hip.
You shot from the hip.
and it worked.
It did work.
Yeah, the smartest people I know tell me that that's the way you really get rich in real estate is by learning how to do this as an art form. And again, like you want to study that deal, in your next deal, if you were to sell that fourplex now, and let's say we go put you into a 10plex, you're going to want to study a deal and make sure, number one, that you like the 10plex better than the fourplex.
Oh, yeah.
And I would challenge you to find a way to go buy the 10plex without selling the fourplex. The only reason to sell it is if you have to.
Oh, no, I love that asset. I don't want to give that one up.
Now, if it was bleeding, would you still love it?
That's the tough part, no.
So you love the cash flow.
Actually, I don't really touch the cash. I like the appreciation. I'm an appreciation
You like
guy
the
as well.
appreciation?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I always tell people about, like, the Midwest. It's like, okay, like, and, my clients are residential. They want to buy small, like a home.
Yep.
So, okay, you can make that $200 a month. Oh, the sewer pipe bursts. Like, what are you going to do now? Now you're just paying money into it. Where's that cash flow? And that property doesn't go up in value. So have fun in the Midwest.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe better at scale.
Some of those, so like I lived in Iowa for 4 years, and some of the places in 10 years, they were the same price.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they don't go up. I mean, there's something kind of cool about that. But the rents have gone up a little bit, and
Rents couldn't go up. Yeah.
I have, as a matter of fact, my partner I talked about earlier, who brought me into the business, he's a cash flow guy, and he ended up selling a lot of his stuff here in Oregon and going to the Midwest and buying houses. And there is a model there, and
Sure,
you go buy a house for $20,000-$30,000, you spend $5,000, clean it up, rent it out for $700 or $800, especially if you're a cash buyer. I mean, I don't know. If you're going to park your cash in a building in Oregon and you're going to pay all cash, you probably aren't going to get the returns you're looking for.
Right.
So, from a leverage standpoint, sure. I think maybe leverage and appreciation go hand in hand. Whereas if you're a super conservative, I don't ever want to lose no matter what kind of buyer, and I'm just going to go buy. Sure, if you have $150,000, don't go buy the fourplex. Go buy 3 houses in, I don't know what state you can buy them in, but Kentucky or I don't know.
Somewhere in the Midwest,
Yeah.
yeah. So what would you say to somebody that was like just getting started and that's kind of a little bit nervous about investing? This is kind of way over their head in terms of like scale, and they're just kind of thinking about how to get their toes wet.
Mm-hmm.
They work another job full time, and they don't have as much capacity. They're kind of more interested in looking at it like they would the stock market.
Yeah. So, this is something that would be hard to dip your toe into. I think you have to sort of immerse yourself in it. I think, you probably need partners. It's not, I don't know. Everybody's different, has a different level of intelligence and a different level of creativity. And like I said before, appetite for risk. And so, if you're looking at just trying to get in, I would highly suggest finding somebody who's already doing it and try to go into a deal with somebody
Just
else.
bring some cash with somebody that has knowledge and just go 50-50 with them.
I think so. partners are my favorite part of doing real estate deals. They're also probably can be one of the worst parts of doing real estate deals. Partner, it's just like picking a wife, right? The right wife will make you happy and it'll be a wonderful life, and the wrong wife will just make things awful. So you have to pick your partners super wisely. And I think it's important to make sure your goals are aligned, to make sure that each one of you have maybe a different skill set and bring something different to the table. I would advise that everybody that gets into a partnership can write a check if things go wrong, because that's kind of where partnerships go sideways, is when something happens and somebody can't help pay for it. But I love the fact if we make $1 million, I love the fact that I get to go celebrate with my partners and share that pie with them. And if we lose $1 million, I love the fact that I don't have to write the whole check. I love it. So I have really been blessed with good partners. I've had a few bad ones that really cost me a lot. But I learned a lot from having the wrong partners, and I learned what I needed to find in my partnerships. But I've been really lucky having multiple really good partners, and they do some things that I don't do. I'm obviously not a in the weeds kind of a guy. I'm not a detail guy. And so, I'm responsible for trying to funnel deals in, thinking of different creative strategies to get our name on the deal, providing a balance sheet to help us get the financing and do that. And that's the role that I play. We own properties that I've never even been to before. So I'm not in the weeds at all. I need partners that are a little bit in the weeds. Because otherwise, as a matter of fact, my one partner who owns 2,000 doors, we're both big picture guys.
Right.
And so that's a bad partnership on one level, because neither one of us are paying attention to some of the things that need to be paid attention to. Luckily, we have really good property managers, and we have good people on our team that are paying attention to some of those things. But at the end of the day, we'll buy a building, and I can remember we bought about half of a city block in Seaside a couple of years ago, and neither one of us even really liked the deal. We were actually kind of trying to get out of the deal, and then we closed the deal, and the thing makes us more cash flow than any other building that we own, and we're like, wow, we love that deal. We really love that building, but we had never even sat down to study it close enough to know where it was. And then there's other buildings where we think, man, this is the one. We really love this one. And then we realize once we begin, like, oh my gosh, this thing's got some problems, and we're going to have a lot of work to do here and a lot of money to spend. And so I think I really think that you have to make mistakes. I mean, I don't know how else you learn. We do an investor meetup down in Salem once a month, and I built a 26-unit project with some partners. I didn't build it. They built it, and I just came into the deal with them. And he spoke, Mark Gallegos, really talented guy. And I asked him while he was up there speaking, and I said, have you ever lost money on a deal? And he said, no, I've had a lot smaller margins on some deals than others, but I've never lost. And my response to him was, then you have lost a lot because you've missed out on a ton of deals. And so from my angle, the way I see that is you don't want to be so conservative to play a never lose game, because you're gonna lose. You're gonna miss out on opportunity. Totally. He talked about underwriting a couple hundred deals, and I'm not dogging him at all, because he's a brilliant guy and he's done very well for himself. But if he had a little bit more of an appetite for risk and he was willing to lose every once in a while, I think that he would be 2 or 3 times as far as he is today. Now, if you're too loosey-goosey, you might go out and just do the wrong 2 or 3 deals right out of the gate, and then you're just toast, and you're like, well, real estate didn't work for me. Then you're going to
choose something else. Yeah. So speaking of that and pitfalls, what are some things that you've run into that taught you like valuable lessons that you could share with our audience?
About partners, or just about buildings?
Partner, real estate, just I mean, it seems like you've had so much experience, and we love hearing about mistakes, because we love learning from other people's mistakes.
I'll tell you about my biggest mistake I ever made. I had a friend from high school who he was kind of the class clown, funny guy, and we didn't know what he was going to do in life, but ultimately he became one of these guys that traveled the world and taught people how to flip houses. And so I was, multifamily guy out buying some plexes and doing kind of the boring, buy this dump and get the cockroaches out and raise the rents. And I mean, it's not that sexy, honestly.
Right. Make money over time with hard work.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's a lot more fun to talk about it than it is to actually do it. But flipping houses is kind of sexy, I mean, it's like you take this old piece of crap and you turn it into this beautiful thing, and they put them on TV and all this stuff. Everybody really celebrates this this moment of flipping houses. And so at one point I felt like I really needed another stream of revenue and I should get into house flipping. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know how to flip houses. So I went and I asked him if he wanted to be my partner. We could flip some houses. This is a guy that, he teaches everybody how to flip houses. Well, he didn't have any money, and so we had to find a money guy. And so I went to one of my partners I owned some apartments with at the time, and he had flipped hundreds of houses and done them very successfully. And he was, out of the California market, and he had a lot of money. And we had a good relationship. And he says, sure, you guys go buy some houses, and I'll fund it. And we'll just, I was like, okay, this all came together, just easy, too easy. So we went out and the partner who taught seminars came up with the idea that we were going to do luxury flips. And so we went out and we bought 10 houses.
10?
This is to start.
What year was this?
I'd never flipped a house before. 2016.
Okay, 2016.
And most of them were in Portland.
All single family.
All single family. A couple of them in Lake O, a couple in Salem. We didn't even have a crew. We didn't have a contractor's license or any of this stuff. And so he was out meeting with retail remodel contractors to do our flips. And, after our hard money is, we borrowed some money from our partner and then we went out and got some hard money loans. And I had about $5 million in hard money loans. And these guys, we set up a business, but somehow it all ended up in my name. So I ended up personally guaranteeing $5 million worth of hard money loans to buy. So there's a mistake. Like, when you sign your name on a personal guarantee, pay attention to what you're doing. It's not just like everything's going to work out, right? And so at that time, I didn't have much money, and I didn't, I had $50,000 a month in debt service on those loans. And so I was just out brokering apartment deals and like just closing deals left and right to keep that business afloat. And at the end of the day, there was one mistake: is the partner with no money. Don't partner with people with no money. There's a great lesson to learn. I learned that $1 million is not really that much money, because we lost $2.1 million. Took us about 6 months to pull that off. We'd get about. I thought, well, what's the risk? We've got all this rehab money sitting there, and we can go do these. Well, the budgets were all wrong. They weren't $150,000 flips. They were $300,000 flips, and they weren't 4-month projects. They were, 14-month projects or more. Yeah. And so I thought, well, what can go wrong? And so we got through about half of them, and we went in and we spent all this money on demo. And then we spent all this money on rewiring them, and then all the replumbing, and then the HVAC, and then we got to add a master bedroom, and then we got to add this, and we got to do that. And it was very pie in the sky, sort of, made for TV stuff. These guys on TV are lying to you. They're not making the money and doing what they say they're doing. It's definitely a show. It's show business. And so the reality is I'd get a building about halfway there, and by the time you're halfway done, you've spent like $250,000 on interest and demo, and you've torn all the drywall out. You're down to the studs. You've got electrical, plumbing, HVAC in. You've spent a lot of money. Yeah. Well, my partner, the money partner guy, he says, you guys don't know what you're doing. I'm out. I'm not part of this anymore. You guys got to figure it out. And he said, I think we should just go sell all these houses. And so we went out. What I found is when somebody walks into a house and it's all torn apart, they want to pay you less for the house than what you paid for it. Here's the risk. You just put $250,000 into a house and it looks like a piece of crap. And so people come in and they're like, well, yeah, I mean, you said you did all these things, but we don't know what you did, and we don't know if it was the right contractor. And so, when you're midway through a project, there is a huge amount of risk to you and your lender. Like between when a project is started and when it's completed, if you don't hit that finish line, you don't know your numbers. Here's a place to underwrite. Don't ever do a flip project unless you really know your numbers. You got to make sure every line item is dialed to a T, and you really got to watch that and manage it. So I learned from me, valuable lesson, I'm not a house flipper. Don't even really like the model. To be honest, I don't consider house flipping to be investing at all. It's more like the car business was when I was in that. It's got that hot potato.
You gotta get it. You gotta move
it's
it.
A time.
Yeah.
It's a time thing, right?
So you better have a good contractor connection. You better do your numbers right.
I think
and
you
hope
better
that
be
the market doesn't shift.
If you're the contractor yourself and you control the timelines and you do a flip that doesn't require any sort of city involvement. One of the things we learned is going in for permits to try to up the square footage on a building. We thought, they tell you, it's a 3 or 4 week process. Almost every single time it was 6 months. Yeah. You don't have 6 months, especially when you're on hard money. So when you line up, there's another lesson. When you line up the wrong funding with the wrong business model, you got to make sure your loan matches. And so if we were just using my money partners, it was just all his money. We're paying cash, and
right. If you would have just done like 2 or 3 instead of 10, maybe
the first 2 we did, we paid all cash for, and you're not up at night worried about it. The other ones where the clock is ticking and you're paying 12 or 13% interest, and then every 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is, they want to charge you 3 more points to refi. I mean, I think that through that whole thing, we paid almost $2 million in interest. So when I line up the loss and I line up the interest, it's almost the same thing. So our hard money lender made what we lost. And
typically the lender doesn't lose.
Yeah. I kind of like I was like, man, maybe I should be a hard money lender instead of doing this. So anyway, that just taught me to stay in my lane. It's not what I do. I took on at least one of the wrong partners in that situation, and I went off and I did something that I knew nothing about, and I didn't stay in my lane. But I learned a lot of lessons, and I learned at that time, I really thought $1 million was a lot of money, and after you lose it, I've paid everybody back and everybody got made whole, but I realized, it is a lot of money, but it's really not what you think. Like, in my mind, I sort of felt like if I had $1 million, I'd be set. Like, this is enough to sort of sail off into the sunset. And after going through that process, I thought, oh my gosh, I heard somebody say the other day that millionaire is the new middle class. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's not. You need, and really going back to the point before, is you want to hold the assets. It's not about buying them to sell them, because then you're paying taxes. You get none of the benefit. You don't get the cash flow. Yep. You don't get principal buy down. Yep. Right? You might get the appreciation because of the sweat equity that you're putting into it, but you don't get to depreciate it. It doesn't go on your depreciation schedule. Yep. So you're not really an investor. You're just really more.
It's a job.
Yeah, it's just a job. And if you like it and that's how you make your money and you're good at it, hey, more power to you. I was bad at it because I didn't have the time to go focus on it every single day. I might have been able to be good at it if that was what I was doing with my day from the time I woke up till the time I went to bed. But I was out brokering apartment deals so I could keep the business going. I didn't foreclose on $5 million worth of loans.
Totally.
Great. Well, I mean, if people are looking to get a hold of you or contact you on social media, what is the best way to find you?
Probably email is good. My email is gabe@smire.com. We'd love the opportunity to, if some people have questions about investing in multifamily or commercial, or they're looking for management, we would love the opportunity to talk to them.
That's awesome.
Great. Thank you so much for the lessons. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.